Hello, Amanda. Thank you for coming here and welcome to Light Club.
Well, thank you for having me. Why is it called Light Club?
Well, it's a play on Fight Club, Light Club. Some of the people I work with thought that there's some similarities between my life and the film Fight Club. One of the things is, as you probably know, my flat burnt down in 2016. And it threw me into a kind of a forced reinvention. I lived with some young cinematographers at the time. They were very early 20s. They just left film school. And they were winning work direct from client. They were masters of marketing, yet quite inexperienced technically. And I was really kind of amazed by what they were doing. And I started realising that if I was going to survive in short form, which, you know, can be a little bit ageist, I think, short form. It's in commercials, it's always about the new kind of up and comers. So I thought, if I'm going to survive in short form, I need to sort of try and reinvent myself. So I started collaborating with these younger filmmakers, and we started doing teaching kind of seminars, and then started this thing called Set Notes, where we break down the technical aspects of filmmaking to help people. So I thought to myself, what would I need to know when I was 25 and starting out? So I kind of started doing a bit of teaching, and then we started building up a kind of community of people, of young people that kind of help with the social media side of things, and that's why it's called Light Club. And this is an old, well, it's kind of humble beginnings. It's an old, damp, cold, as you can tell, workshop, and we hope it's going to be in a studio one day. But for now, it's the only space we've got to use, and it's kind of Fight Club-esque, I guess.
Yeah, but no one's beating the shit out of each other here.
No, not now, not today.
Not yet.
That's tomorrow. Would you mind explaining to our viewers who you are?
My name is Amanda Blue. I am a filmmaker. I direct, I write, and I've directed documentaries, commercials, and now scripted.
And how do we know each other?
You were my cinematographer on my first ever commercial, and you have been my cinematographer on nearly all of my commercials. Not all, but most ever since. Having
worked with you, I always thought one of the things that struck me about how you work with your subjects, either your actors or real people in some cases, you were so quick to kind of put them at ease. And I thought that was something that you had kind of had to, sort of craft over a period of time. But you were just like that to begin with in your personality, do you think?
I think some of that's definitely just who I've always been. I've always been really aware of who in the room or at school, or even if I go back, that was uncomfortable, or so was shy,
like
or
an empath,
hugely an empath. So I think I always aware of like how to play the room, like who needs what from me, and also I was always really good at being able to go into any kind of space. So I could go, and especially when I came to the UK, being Australian allows you to be outside of the class system, which I think is a really amazing freedom. So no one could place me. I couldn't, so I've always been as comfortable with someone from a very humble background as someone who's from a really privileged. Neither intimidate me. And I know lots of people can't go, if they're very middle class, they feel really uncomfortable in a really working class space, and I just have never had that ever. And I think because I probably rode the class system a bit, my background just inevitably did that. So there's that, but I do think I crafted it and honed it because then bringing in the element of the artifice of filming and cameras and set and lots of other people around. So I'm very conscious that is an intimidating environment for real people, and for actors it's sometimes a fearful environment. Like sets are quite scary. We're all a bit scared, especially at the beginning. I think you've got to, I've learnt over time that I'm not the only one that's a bit scared. Like, so my job is to make everyone feel as comfortable and as safe. And the safer they feel emotionally and the safer hands they think they're in, then I feel like they're really free to perform, because even real people have to perform, even though we're not calling it that, but it's the same thing. I'm trying to get a performance out of a real person, and actors equally need to feel safe. And what makes them feel safe is like you've got to quickly work out who needs what. Some people need you not to give them much direction, and if you gave them too much it will make them feel really anxious, and other people need lots of support. And like, so again, it's like reading what is the right thing to make the artist feel comfortable and settled, so that they can be their kind of best, truest, whatever the scene or the nature of the project requires from them.
Was there a period where you felt like an imposter on a film set and you weren't comfortable?
Definitely. I still do. Still do.
It takes a while to lose that, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so terrible. And you sort of think, I think a lot of women have thought, oh, it's because we're women. And then you hear so many men feeling the same way. So, yeah, definitely. And now because I'm moving completely into scripted, so even though I've vastly experienced director, I feel like I'm still having to go, especially with actors, I would say, that's like I'm really having to go, who's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, you haven't directed enough actors? Like, how can you tell this quite famous person about the nuance of their performance? Or so I still feel that, and I feel like my next hurdle is kind of feeling completely not like that in the scripted space. I really don't feel that anymore in the documentary space. I feel like I'm so, it's just like so my kind of DNA. I just find it so kind of, I know exactly, it's like becoming like a master trader in documentary. I feel like I know exactly how to manage the set, the people, the story, it doesn't mean it's not hard, and it's still, every time it's a challenge, but it's definitely not a space that I feel an imposter in anymore. But and at the beginning of making commercials, I was definitely like, I went from being on sets with 4 people, sometimes 2 people, sometimes just me shooting and doing sound in the beginning of making films, to, maybe 6 or 7 people was the most on a documentary shoot, to like 100 people the first time I was on a set.
What was the first kind of big shift in the way you kind of had to behave as when you came from documentary and you came onto a commercial film set for the first time?
I think the very first thing I shot was I learnt so much that day, which you shot. Thank God you were nice. No one had sat me down and told me any protocols. Like, the thing that was the funniest is that I didn't understand. So I remember the very first shot we shot of that commercial, the first commercial I ever made, and it was a woman relaxing in a spa bath, a mum, because it was a holiday commercial, and it was like quite a long shot, wasn't it? And then we were going to go in and do close-ups, and it was the first frame of the day, and it was a bit steamy, and I just remember the scene, and the kind of video village was over by the pool, and we were somewhere else, and you've framed it and I'm ready to go. And then Stuart, the producer, came over and said, okay, they just want to check the frame. And I was kind of like, okay, like, all right, okay, if they want, like, you're sort of slowing us up here, but okay. And then that happened, and then they wanted to check the frame again, and all the way through the morning to like lunch, you must have done 4 or 5 different setups. Oh, they just want to check the frame. I was like, okay, what do they do? Kind of right, if they want to. And then at lunch he said, I don't think you've understood something. They actually have to check the frame before you can film. Like, they have a say in, they've got a say in what you're doing. And I was like, what the fuck are they really, all those people have got a say in what that's going to take hours if they're all going to feed in. But they didn't. And so like things like that I just didn't know. Oh, and that was the other thing I did on that day, is I said, and again the producer said to me, it was Janine, she said, don't, so they came over and said, oh, that was lovely, are you really happy? And I probably, because I'm never that, I'm happy to move on, but God, I probably could have done something more if we had more time. It's that sort of. So I didn't say, "Oh yeah, it was great. I think it was amazing." And like, I sort of went, "Yeah, it's okay." But if we, and she said, "Don't ever say you're not happy to them."
Yeah, like it's a performance.
Yeah, and it's just that was that morning. Honestly, by sort of 1:00, the penny had dropped. That like, this isn't just me on my own. I was just so used to having total freedom. I mean, you don't even have the freedom on a drama or on a scripted thing that you have on documentary, because there's no one there. There's no one else there. Like, it's just you flying by the seat of your pants making all the decisions with your tiny crew. So that was a great learning curve. And then I just learnt the etiquette of those sets, those bigger sets with lots of departments. And
being the kind of sole shooter, is that something you're going to want to go back to from time to time, or is that a place you've kind of moved on from now?
I only self-shot in the beginning to be able to make documentaries, and that was a way of being able to do it and direct, and and I learnt to shoot, and because I'd worked for Mike Figgis for years, so I'd learnt to record sound and I'd learnt to shoot, and so I kind of could be a one-man or one-woman band for a little bit, and it just got me going. And it was a period when those first digital cameras came out that weren't like big digibeaters, they were like smaller, and they were broadcast quality, and Mike Figgis bought one of those, so I learnt to use that camera, and that camera became the camera that I would say, when would this have been, like this sort of late 90s was a camera that if you could work it and use it, you could make the whole documentary on it. And it meant I got to make documentaries straight away, like Channel 4 and the BBC gave me that. So, and then I became known as quite a good like self-shooter, because I was good at framing and I was good at, but I didn't. And then I got I think I got a bit lazy, because that was the way I knew how to shoot. And so when I went on to something a bit bigger, and the suggestion came, use a documentary camera operator. I was a bit scared, because I was like, how do I keep it intimate if it's not just me and this one person? There's no one else there to interfere. And that was a great experience, because then I realized, actually, I don't want to be fiddling with buttons. And once I trusted, it was a man, once I trusted him and we shot together a lot, then I was like, I didn't ever want to go back to self-shooting. I didn't ever want to profess to be, I wasn't good at, I think it's like a sort of, it's not an insult or anything, but as you move through and you go, God, the image is so important and it's so beautiful, and I'm not an expert in creating that to the kind of optimum level. I was doing too many things. I was interviewing someone, I was thinking where we should shoot, I was trying to get the sound levels right, so to take that away and just concentrate on the performance and the storytelling was like, honestly, a liberation, a creative kind of, that was a light bulb moment. That was really, I'd probably only made a couple of films, and then I was like, oh God, I can use crew. And then that has been a series of escalations through of like upping it and upping it and upping it. And in the documentary form, until I would say, I don't know, probably, 7 or 8 years ago, people still didn't care enough about the image, and then they started to care. And I was probably part of that early, like making things look exquisite and allowing that to be part of the journey of the story, of the storytelling of the documentary, not just kind of grabbing things, but composing things and framing things. And so I just kind of, until I sort of, I don't really make documentaries so much now, but that became a huge part of my aesthetic, I suppose, was for it to look beautiful and still have the intimacy and still have the incredible, storytelling. It didn't matter if there were 30 people around. It shouldn't matter.
Do you, the sort of development of aesthetics in documentary, what do you put that down to? Do you think that's to do with the technology and the ease of getting more cinematic imagery? I guess the funding around shooting something on film, if it's a documentary, will be trickier. Do you think it's to do with the theatrical distribution now, or maybe kind of the whole kind of Netflix world we're in?
The Netflix world is recent, and that's really changed things for sure. I think there was some really significant big feature docs that did really well at the cinema, and were beautifully shot, and were shot, like if you think about like One Day in September, like some of the kind of Kevin McDonald that were there, and they got big money, and then Man on Wire, those things had huge money for a documentary, not huge money for a feature, a drama, a feature, but still big money. And there was an ambition in those, so I think that filtered down, and there was more of a sense of, you still don't have enough money. So every time, if I think about Deep Water, we made that look exquisite, and we had, well, it was a big budget for a documentary, but it was like $1 million Australian dollars, which is £500,000, but we were trying to do things that people would have been doing with much more money. So it's still, we were still always limited, but the ambition was there, and the ambition was supported by the kind of people in, who are funding those projects. So I think it's filtered down, and then Netflix has changed the game in that they do really care about their long series documentaries looking really brilliant. And filmmakers have come in that have probably come from drama and come from commercials, and my aesthetic in documentary, getting richer visually, came from making commercials. Definitely, because I wanted, and I learnt the craft of the how we can do that, how you can do that with not huge amounts of money. And so it kind of, commercials gave me access to understanding all the tricks and the tools, and what you can achieve and what you should aim to achieve, actually what you should ask to achieve. You should demand from like the people that are funding it, that's what you want.
Talk a little bit about your kind of, because you mentioned earlier about the collaborations because you went from a sole shooter and then you started working with, like you said, heads of department that you felt at first you were kind of curious about what they could bring to your aesthetic, and then you realise actually this is a liberation for you, and they could bring a lot. Do you have a sort of Is it a lot of it down to sort of just personality with the people you work with, or would you say it's do you have different ways of working with different kind of different heads of department, or is it kind of what would you say is kind of the qualities you look for in the people you collaborate with?
I think so. If I think about cinematography, because I think that's the crucial department for me, other than the actors and the performers, I think that I've got to have a sense that it's like the actors with me. I have to feel safe with them. I have to know that they will collaborate and not be dictatorial. I want them to bring ideas. I don't want someone I can tell what to do. I want someone who's going to understand my vision and help me find it, help me kind of realize it, I should say. So you do need someone that you feel like you're going to get on with. It's like an editor. An editor's the other one. You are going to spend more time with them than anyone else. So you've got to have you've got to I feel like for me, I've got to want to be with that person. I've got to know that person's going to respect my ideas, but also like tell me if it's not going to work and not be afraid to say that so we don't waste time. So like, it's just all about being on an equal footing. So they feel empowered, I feel empowered, how best, and you know, that they're really creative and bringing something amazing that I'm not bringing. So they're adding something every time that we're looking at a scene or looking at a shot, you know? So collaboration's everything, and you've got to feel safe to be able to collaborate really well, I think, and get the best out of each other.
So how much do you think sharing the same taste in cinema plays a part in that?
It's an interesting question.
Because I remember I was listening to actually a podcast you did with David Reviews, and I remember you mentioned 70s cinema. We never really spoke that much about cinema. No, not a lot, but we had an instinct that we shared a similar kind of aesthetic.
Do you love 70s cinema? Yeah. And will you then go, oh, she loves 70s cinema?
Yeah, I know. It's the first time I remember being surprised by that, but not surprised by that.
Yeah, no, we didn't. So I suppose if you turned around to me and said, God, I hate Drugstore Cowboy, I think it's shittest, you know. I mean, Midnight Cowboy, sorry, drugs. Midnight Cowboy. Like, I'm trying to think of all the 70 films that are so amazing. I'd be like, really? What? You don't? Like, I'd find that peculiar to not understand the humanity in that and the beauty in the way it's shot and everything. So I suppose I would have probably slight alarm bells if someone really couldn't stand something that I thought told you something about them. I don't know, it's more probably about the storytelling, you know, like I think it is important. I think it becomes important more so when you start getting sent references. So I've just worked with this cinematographer in Australia called Bonnie Elliott, and when I of course I looked at her work and I loved her work, and she's incredibly respected, but as soon as she started sending me references, and some of them were still photography, someone that like, because the film I'm making is it's literally like a collage. She was
sending you references.
Yeah, so just like mood boards, like sort of she literally would do like an Instagram page and just have like, oh, look at this Jürgen Teller photography and and what about this, and I like reflections, and it's not that I want this, but I like the way the light, like because we were shooting in this incredible Australian landscape and we were bringing in lots of bright artificial light, so like pinks and yellows that we were then you know, so it was like so her references were when I went, oh my God, she totally gets this.
Right, this is a really good point for our listeners, actually, because you know, a lot of them are young filmmakers, DOPs in particular. I've never usually taken initiative and given references before I'm in that dialogue with someone. I think that's great that she did that she put together a series that almost seduced you with boards.
She did like mood boards. She literally did mood boards. It was amazing. I was the same. I was like, no one's ever done that. She's like, I'll go onto Instagram. I've done a little page for you, and even had some little tiny video like little links to videos. And I thought it was so. I was also blown away, and I thought that was such a clever way to get inside a director's head, and then you have something tangible to talk about.
Yeah.
And actually lots of references are better than almost like, well, because sort of I suppose I wouldn't want someone to say, well, I want it to look like, you know, Little Women, or I want it to look like something that's just been shot by another director. Like if someone was said, you know, I think lots of references that speak to the
she was fishing to find what you were interested in, and then she would narrow it down, presumably. Yeah. And
then we would do boards for like, then once she was shooting it and we were on it and we were in pre-production, because we're trying to work out, because it is really kaleidoscopic, the film. It's like about these two artists, and the way they worked was very layered. The whole thing's about layers, so it's like image upon image, and then taking the layers away. And so we use loads of like refractors in front of the lens, so there's lots of layers, like kaleidoscopic layers, even when we were shooting. But it was a really good way to sort of, before we entered the first day of photography, to both of us have a really clear intent and ambition. And then I went to a camera test with her, because we had these ideas about putting like paint. We put paint in fish tanks and shot through the fish tanks. Yeah. And
does she work in just long form, or she works in commercials as well?
No, she doesn't work in commercials at all, but she does do some sort of short installation-y art films,
right,
which she can, like, she went to the film school in Australia, but she does do those sorts of things. I think she did a couple of commercials early on in her career, but she's only long form and mainly scripted, but also documentaries, more occasional documentaries. But so then by then, when we were testing and really testing with all these different, like, you know, like pyramid things in front of the lens, and then the paints, and we really understood what we were both hoping to achieve. You know, fishing around and playing still and being, you know, creative, but we sort of had an ambition that was clear.
That kind of visual journey that you go on with documentary, how much of it is informed by your choice of location, would you say? Or is it something that you get kind of actively involved with where you shoot certain scenes? Or is it just a given kind of that you have to stay authentic to kind of what's happening?
It really depends on the project, I would say. Like, of course, some documentaries are rooted in a time and a place, and they have to be in that time and place depending on what the story is. This had two elements. Like, it's the women both truly live in one lives virtually off grid, and she's like 70 and sleeps outside in a tin hut in like the most majestic Australian landscape with kangaroos everywhere and wallabies and, you know, and bush and burnt bush because of the bushfires. And like, so obviously I needed to shoot in that place, and also their artistic work is very connected to the land. So this film had to be about the landscapes that are reflected in their artwork or in their fabrics or in their fashion. And then the other lady too, she lives in the Blue Mountains, which is a place that's like of incredible beauty, but it's surrounded by like Australian wildflowers. And the flowers, the Waratah, which is this Australian flower that comes out for 6 weeks, came out whilst we were there. And that is her symbol. That's like her totem. So the landscape in this became crucial. But most of the film is based on, because they've been artists for 40 years, is on archival material. So they all have their own, they filmed everything, and there's just masses of that. There's sort of 3 elements. And then I needed to do present day interviews with a chorus, like a Greek chorus. And there was a big decision around, do you put those people in their environment? You know, that a lot of them are interesting. They would live in nice houses and things, but we decided to create a studio space and bring Jenny and Linda's landscapes to them. So we made this really conscious choice of doing it is an artificial space, but bringing in like wildflowers. They're the most amazing kind of sculptural floral backgrounds that the interviews have, that are meadowy and wild, and some are more Australian wildflower and some are like gum trees. And so that was a specific decision to use a location, just a studio, but not make it feel like it's just, you know, there's so much. Yeah, look, the studio can really work for certain things. It was just the way to do it. So sometimes, like, I do think location matters. I think it depends on how much of it is retrospective as well. Like Deepwater was a really retrospective story. We were going back in time to tell this story, and so we again emulated. We used the real landscapes that those events had happened in. We went back to those landscapes. We went back to the beaches. We went back to the toilets where men were murdered. We went back to the cliffs.
Yeah, very interesting.
Because I think it makes it visceral and present tense when you're telling something that's, you know, a past story, a story. It depends on what the, you know, because then you see wonderful things. There's this really good documentary series called that's on the BBC called Once Upon a Time in Iraq, I think it is, and it's the story of the Iraq War, but through the eyes of a really interesting array of people. So, like, you know, people who just lived in various cities in Iraq, people who fought, you know, for the Iraqis, people who fought for the Americans. It's like journalists, and it's just all in a studio. Of course, it's loads of archive. They go to archive, but the entire thing is And then
were you influenced by that when you made a decision to have your studio floral sequences?
I didn't want it to be. I thought that carried being just a black space, because it was like this a black space. It carried it because there was no reason to bring Iraq into that room, because it was so visceral and what that. But for us, I think just given the nature of the documentary that I'm making, it's really an art film. It's about two artists who the essence of their work is about colour. They're obsessed with colour and what colour does and colour brings to people, and the landscape. So they directly took from the Australian landscape in their work, and they were constantly reflecting on what Australia was through landscape and through iconography, buildings and things as well. So it felt like it would felt wrong to have a space that didn't reflect the essence of the world we were in. So that's why we brought so much colour and floral into those spaces.
Could you talk a little bit more about the other influences that your stint in commercials has helped you with the documentaries you're making now?
Influences, meaning in what sense? Influences into
the way you work.
Film the way I've worked in commercials.
So the things you kind of inherited with the kind of
from documentary to commercials.
Well, actually, from documentary to commercials, and from commercial back to documentary will be both. Oh, right, really.
Back to doc. Well, that's when I feel like I've done my best work in documentary, is having had the commercial experience. I think I had the marriage of all the things that I think are really important. So I felt like I'm already skilled now and experienced in getting great story out of people, interviewing them, making them feel comfortable, telling and honouring their stories. Like that I've got. Yeah. And what commercials taught me to do is how to care about, like, you know, every image. Yeah. So, like, you know, because going from making things that are 90 minutes long to 2 minutes long or 30 seconds long, it's that kind of paring down of, like, each image, like storyboarding. I love storyboarding. I've realised I never thought I'd be someone that liked that. Because I sort of didn't, initially I resisted storyboarding because I didn't like, that's the opposite of documentary, being forced into making a decision before you've even arrived on set. But I actually love the discipline of it, and I've taken it into now doing scripted work. But so I liked learning how to craft and how powerful the individual image is and how much story you can pack into. So what it was allowing me to do was use, like, so I've got the basis of being able to tell good story and get great performances from people, and now it's about having those two things work more beautifully together, the image and the fundamentals of the storytelling and the performance. So how do you craft a beautiful image that's going to pack a bigger emotional punch? Yeah. And actually really thinking about how imagery is going to heighten the feeling of a documentary and care about it, rather than just, like, you know, following someone walking around a street. Like, you don't necessarily, isn't the right images to be playing over that sentiment. So just giving much more care and attention to it, and knowing how to achieve high-end, beautiful imagery that can be crafted around and make it more potent, make the story or you know, the whole experience a cinematic experience. So commercials absolutely directly taught me to do that and take that into a documentary world, an aesthetic completely. And as I rarely make them, so I've made, since my commercials days, I've made Deepwater, and I'm making this one now, but they're both cinematic.
Are you allowed to tell us the name of it?
Well, at the moment it's called Step Into Paradise.
That's the working title, is it?
I think it will be the title.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I think it will be the title.
Tell us a little bit about it? Or?
So it's based on the lives of two in Australia they're sort of well-known and famous. They started off as fashion designers and in the 70s, and they're interesting because they were part of, Jenny Key in particular, one of the women's called Jenny Key, she came over to London in the 60s, you know, all the Aussies that came over and just ripped it up creatively, you know, so, you know, Clive James and Richard Neville and Germaine Greer and just this kind of Robert Hughes, these intellectual Australians that came in the 60s and had started Oz magazine and did all sorts of extraordinary things and had a real imprint on the kind of swinging London. She was part of that, and she's quite a well-known figure in that at that time. And what's interesting about, and the other woman, Linda, was meanwhile travelling through, like, the Far East and Papua New Guinea and doing the hippie trail, and they were already creative young artists, bohemians. And they both chose to go back to Australia in the early 70s, which, if you don't know anything about Australia, but in the early 70s was like, there had been a conservative government, extremely kind of pro-monarchy government all through the 50s and 60s. And at the beginning of the 70s, someone called Gough Whitlam became the prime minister, and he was revolutionary. Like, he was a liberal, and he cared passionately about the arts, and he cared about women's issues and Aboriginal land rights, and it just was like these sweeping changes. What happened in those years from like 72 to 74 was like more change happened, and that's when like Peter Weir directed Picnic. Like all the best films started being made, like early 70s Australian cinema, Picnic at Hanging Rock, and incredible Australian cinema, incredible books, you know, all the incredible authors who became, you know, Booker Prize winning, they were all writing. It was just this surge of like, having been this very kind of stilted, backward, conservative, bland place that looked to England, looked to Europe for its kind of cultural cachet, was now going, fuck it, like, this is interesting. What we have here is amazing. And like, it was the first moment of going, let's not be a colony anymore. Let's look to what we have and what's interesting about this place. And so all these young artists sort of stayed, and a lot of them, like Brett Whiteley and people, there was all these sort of interesting things happening in the art world and the film world and the fashion world, and these two women were the fashion sort of icons of that time, and they created this look and this shop and this label and this that was incredible. No one had done anything like it, and it ended up being incredibly lauded overseas. Like Italian Vogue did huge spreads on it in the New York Times, and it was this moment of like, so there's the two women that started that, and they then went on to become sort of painters and textiles designers, and they had you know, their work was now being toured around the world as art, not just fashion. It was like, is it fashion, is it art? It's all those sort of ideas. And so it's really a bigger story about their love of Australia, their love of each other. They weren't lovers, but they fell in love as friends, and they fell in love as collaborators, and they've been friends for 40 years, so they're in their 70s, and they're still these creative, incredible force fields. And so I was drawn to it because I'd said no to the project twice, but I met them, and you've got to see them. I mean, they're visual, they're the most stylish women you've ever seen. If you actually, when you see them, when I show you pictures of them, you'll go, I get it. They're like the most extraordinary creatures and dress in the most exquisite.
And how old are they now?
73 and 70. And so...
And they're still into their art, and they're still going strong.
Living in these incredible landscapes.
That's very inspiring.
It's so inspiring. And there are, believe me, there are few women artists and women kind of designers that are going still in their 70s. So it's a film about longevity and age and being a woman and being creative and being a, you know, people that collaborate for that time, and you know, and obviously they've lived long lives, so they've had all sorts of personal tragedies, and so it's a really hard film to make though, because it's kind of like this collage of lots of stuff.
Is there too much choice? Almost?
There's way too much choice at the moment, and that's where documentary, and that's why I said I wouldn't do it, because I'm sort of, they're so hard to edit, you know, to get it to the place where you've boiled the soup down to like what are the 5 important things I'm trying to say here. Takes a really long time.
And that process of finding out the essence of what you're trying to say, your point you're trying to make, is that something that is an organic process for you, or do you kind of have an instinct for that straight off the bat?
No, it took me a while to find the heart of this, and I still think I'm finding it. I think I have a really clear sense of what it shouldn't be. Like, I really know it shouldn't be like, you know, Jenny was born in Bondi in 1950, and you know, it's not that. It's a piece of art to reflect them as artists. I know that what thematically is important, and I've got to get across. Like, I know what, you know, this kind of love affair with each other, with the landscape. It's a celebration. I haven't made a film for a long time that's really celebratory, but has darkness in it as well. So to find those things, I know what they are. What will sing the loudest. You know, because there's a lot of storytelling in both of their lives. There's lots of story beats. Like, I did the story beat sheet the other day. I wrote down all the story beats. And I mean, it's like, you could make 10 episodes, you know, could make 10 1 hour. It's that I don't know yet. Like, that, like, what are those most important, salient things that will drive this narrative on? That will come out in the wash of the edit.
So you must have a fair bit of trust in finding, is that what documentaries taught you? Kind of trust in knowing you'll find a story.
Not to sweat. I think that's what I'm good on. You know, I don't sweat the small stuff. You've probably noticed. I have a faith that things will work out and you'll find a way through. I definitely have that, and that also might be age. That also might be experience. Like, I definitely kind of know it'll be okay, and it feels at the moment. Even I feel a bit like, oh God, is this going to work? Is it? is it going to make sense? Does anyone care? I feel a bit like that. And I'm writing a drama at the moment. This drama that I've been writing it came out of a documentary project I never made. And that's the same. Like, I know it's amazing, but I'm sure. But then I'm like, is it? Would anyone ever watch this? Is it only me that's interested? It's hard to. I think everyone has that, don't they? To retain the faith in an idea.
Do you kind of notice that something starts taking on a life of its own, and you kind of follow the life that you've kind of created in a way? And
yes,
does that kind of talk back to you?
Yeah, I think that happens, and then I think that can stop for a while, and then it has to start up again because the production process is so long. So you might have the idea, you develop it into a drama, you're then writing, that gets stopped for a bit. You've got to retain the faith. But I think when you start, I'm writing 2 things at the moment, and both the dramas, they do take on a life of their own completely, absolutely. When you have the time to sit and write and allow the characters to breathe and to move around and to definitely. And
how would you say writing informs you as a director? Writing your own material as opposed to adapting something else?
I think I write, and someone told me this, I write completely with images in my head. So I probably over-explain too much how something should look. Someone told me that recently about a lot of when directors write scripts, not all, but they often do lots of explaining of the actual shots and I see it. So I literally see it in my head as I'm writing it. It's not just about what they're saying to each other or.
And is that just I guess there's different kinds of the way we see the world sonically or visually or whatever. I mean, I'm certainly visual and clearly so you. Is that something that you would say that it's always been the case, or something that's developed with your love of cinema or your career as a director?
I think that's developed. I don't think I used to think as visually as I do now. I think when I write now, even when I do a treatment for commercials, I see the shots and I kind of have imagined a room, and it won't be that room because we haven't even looked at locations yet. So I definitely, that has been honed. That has definitely been honed from probably pitching ideas, which I've had to do a lot of, writing treatments for commercials, because that's another discipline. I bloody hate it, but it does make you have to think about how you would realise this sort of few pieces of few pages you've been sent from a creative team. Which is that's been a really good journey. Good
discipline to learn, isn't it?
A really good discipline, definitely.
Just the shorthand of, I think people don't really appreciate sometimes by watching commercials, the shorthand, the skill of shorthand that goes into doing something efficiently within 30 seconds or within a minute. Definitely.
Because when I first started making commercials, the first few storyboards, I'm still good mates with the storyboard artist. I remember I'd boarded, I should have really boarded 22 shots, and I'd boarded 38. Because that would have been how I thought, because in documentary it's so easy to I'm just going to turn the camera on because we don't really care about the lighting. We don't you're just going to, coverage is so quick and simple and, so I came in with a sort of more laissez-faire, lazy probably, and then being forced to go, no, you literally, that shot's going to take, again, Stuart saying that shot's going to be 2 seconds long. This is only 30 seconds. You can't have 40. You've already made it 60 seconds. So that was really hard, and I really resisted it, and I really didn't like it because I felt like my freedom was being curtailed and my creative freedom was being curtailed. But all it was is I'd formed a creative habit that was probably lazy but served a particular genre of filmmaking, and this now I needed to become much more decisive and clearer. And actually I think that process has been really great, and even to the degree that now I'm pitching on this drama to direct, and there's some car scenes in it, and I haven't shot much car stuff, so she was like, how will you do it? And I said, I'll storyboard it. How can I, if I sit with a cinematographer and a storyboard artist and the designers, we can't fuck it up.
The whole thing,
it's if you're nervous that I haven't done that, then it's okay. I know the way to do it, and I know that I don't have to be it was you that said this to me, I don't have to be the expert in everything. And I think I felt like when I came onto a commercial set for the first time, where you feel like the imposter is you don't think you're allowed to not know. And I would say that's for sure. Women suffer from that much more than men, because women don't put their hand up when they're not quite ready and experienced enough to do it. They wait till they've got all the experience and then go, because you're scared of failing, because you perhaps think that people expect, because you're unexpected anyway being on the set. It's unusual, not so much now, but certainly, I mean, still now in certain places, but so you feel like I better have all the answers.
I find particularly female cinematographers suffer from this fear that they're not technical enough.
Yeah.
And I always said to them, you know, the ones I get to talk to, the students I get to talk to, I'm always saying you don't have to be technical to be a cinematographer. You have a focus puller. You have people around you. You have a strong gaffer, a strong focus puller. You just need to be able to communicate what it is in your mind that you want to convey.
That's amazing you saying that, because I would have thought like you would have said to me, you don't have to be that technical. You don't need to know about all the lens. You know, I do know about lenses now, but you don't need to know this. And you don't. And actually, the fact that you can even say that to a cinematographer is even more heartening.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, you need to be a visual psychiatrist more than you need to be a technician.
Yeah.
Because you have great technicians. Yeah. You know, having a great focus puller and a great gaffer, literally, you can let them do everything for you, but what they need from you is your leadership and what they're actually going to do.
Yeah.
But they'll, you know, to know every light. I mean, sometimes it's about working with people that aren't going to hold that against you. Yeah. So you have a gaffer, for example, and if you're not talking to them in the language they understand, they might have a problem with that. But most really good gaffers will quite happily take on the role of choosing a light for you. Yeah. If you can communicate to them the kind of quality of light that you want. Yeah. Then they'll happily do that. And if they're really good gaffers and have had a lot of experience with light, then they can semi-light the scene for you, and you can just be turning the odd light off to get the you know. And as you grow, you'll learn from your crew.
That's so interesting, because that makes me feel even better about, like, because you definitely did help me by saying to me, you don't have to have all the answers, you don't have to know all the, you know, every technical thing. You just need to tell me what it is you want and what you're trying to achieve and why. And then I've always held that. So I've not felt like it's okay to go, I'm not sure. What do you think? You know, that's okay. But it does take a while to have the confidence to think no one's going to judge you for that. And it's not going to mean that you don't know what you're doing. And but I definitely feel safer in saying I'm not sure, and that's okay.
Well, that's being vulnerable is actually quite brave. To show vulnerability is actually quite a brave thing to do. I think people mistake that, you know, vulnerability for weakness, where it's absolutely, you know, so to be willing to be vulnerable is actually. I remember I listened to a lot of a guy called, do you know Alain de Botton?
Yeah. I've read lots of his books.
I listened to him quite a lot, and he's always talking about the first question you should ask someone is, how are you crazy? Yeah. When you meet them, and just immediately show vulnerability to each other, and you'll have a far richer human experience if you do that.
I'm always trying to work out, like, especially with actors, what's their crazy, like, because if I know, you're just really insecure about your performance, okay, I'm really good with that, I can help that. But if it's like, oh no, they're a total egomaniac narcissist, then I'm like, oh, I'm not so good with them. I'll have to go in armed in a different way. Like, I know the kind of crazy that suits me, that I like. You know, it's like there's ones that I'm not that worry me, that scare me as well.
Have you ever had to deal with a kind of narcissist that
I've worked for one. I've worked for people. I haven't yet as a performer, but that will come. That's no doubt coming. But
how did you deal
I've worked with people that I'm not very good, I've got to say. I'm not very good with people I think have got agendas for the sake of that. That's a different thing, I suppose. I could probably just deal with a narcissist. I think more about people who've got agendas that aren't.
Do you have an authority issue at all? Do you like to? Are you quite an independent thinker, and you don't like to kind of deal with the kind of status quo, or is it?
I think I'm mostly. I don't know. It depends on who and what and how it's being delivered. I mean, it really does. I wouldn't be good with diktats. Yeah. I wouldn't definitely. Because that's not the nature of the beast. Like we're in a collaborative medium, and I think I'm really good at collaborating, but I'm also got I think mostly I've got a really clear vision. I don't know, I think I know what I want.
That's right. You see, that's the thing.
But I'm collaborative.
Yeah. The important thing is to have a kind of point of view.
Yeah, I have a point of view.
Yeah, if you have a point of view, then that's all you kind of need. You just need to start with a point of view.
Yeah. And even if it's wrong, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Exactly.
It's better to have a wrong point of view than no point of view. No point of view is a disaster.
Yeah, it was just like flailing about, isn't it? And no, I think that's the thing, is to have a point of view, and that can be changed.
And to be willing to be updated, to have the confidence. So like you said, that kind of trust, it will reveal itself to you. Yeah. But you've got to start in a direction. You've got to kind of plough into a direction, or otherwise you just, like you say, you're frozen with fear on the film set, which is no good for anyone.
Yeah. I was going to say something you were saying before. I was thinking about when you're saying about, like, like the cinematographers, young females, like not having to know everything as well. I was thinking like about that. I think, and who I like to work with, I think when I think about like cinematographers who I think are amazing and are helping me, and it'd be the same with production designers as well, is when I know they know the story. What infuriates me is if I think you haven't even really read this scene, like because if you've read the scene and perhaps you haven't understood the scene, that's different. And if you've read, because actually what we decide to do with the camera, if there's a particular point of view, or there's a particular psychology, or there's a particular emotion, we have to be illuminating that. We have to be pushing that. We have to be. And so, you might be slowly pushing in, you might be pulling out, you might be trying, but there has to be a reason why we're doing that. Sometimes it can just be you want movement because it needs to have a pace because of what you've just come out of. But I think I think it frustrates me when I think someone throws up an idea that's just random because it would be a good thing to do because it would look good. Yeah. Not like, actually this should be looking great, of course, that goes without saying, but it should be adding.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Adding to it. That's what I like.
It's gratuitous work.
Yeah, let's just shoot on anamorphic. I've heard that, and I'm like, but why? Like, I love that. I agree, but like, we've got to have a reason because I've also got to go back and sell that to someone. And that, so something recently I'm pitching on really should be anamorphic. Like, and there's really strong reasons why it should be. And thankfully they agree and they've been having the same conversation. But there's other things I think there's actually no need for, like, that's just a sort of one example. But I think it's knowing that someone cares about the project like you do. I know they maybe will never quite care as much as you do, because it's your baby often, but when you feel that from your crew, that's when it's amazing. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's what separates...
Teach young cinematographers to care about the story and show they care about it. Yeah. Not just
to demonstrate
how could it look good.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think there's another level up from your technically proficient cinematographers. The next step up is the ones that are storytellers. Yeah. Like I said, visual psychiatrists, they kind of understand, when you speak to when you hear the great cinematographers speak, they rarely talk about technical matters. They talk about stories, they talk about art, they talk about, they get influenced by paintings, for example, and they'll talk about the use of light and stuff like that, but they very rarely talk about, they ask questions by manufacturers, why do you use this lens, why do you use that? But that's a common misconception, the technical products and the value of those products somehow informs the storytelling. I don't think that's the case, and I think it's really important to try and get that out of your system as soon as you can as a cinematographer, particularly because there is a kind of fetish around equipment with young cinematographers, and they kind of judge each other on how many expensive bits of equipment they have on a film set. I mean, directors can suffer from this as well. It's like they're desperate to shoot on film. It's like, why do you want to shoot on film? Do you know what the strengths of film are, and do you know what the weaknesses are? Because there's a lot of weaknesses as well with shooting on film. Your reason for choosing anamorphic on this job coming up?
If I shoot it is because it's I can't really tell you about it because it's because of the psychology of the main character who's having a breakdown, and the world they're in, and he's a sort of authority figure who's having a breakdown in a particular world that's always coming at him, that's always scallies and crime and edgy things, people. It's like it's a non-stop, and it's also the other thing I think the whole thing should feel like it's moving. There's almost an argument to shoot the whole thing on Steadicam slightly. It should feel kind of woozy, frenetic, and should feel like just as he's regrouping or finding calm, something else comes at him. So it's just this thing, and the landscapes, it's like goes from sort of quite big British crumbling sea landscapes, beach-ish places, to estates and to like vacant land, and there's always other characters. I just felt the feeling of it being like the Wild West, but in the north of England slightly. Yeah.
And this is a documentary project?
No, it's a drama.
This is a drama. Yeah. This is the one you're writing at the moment.
No, this is something I'm pitching on to direct. Right. So it's a commission. Yeah. BBC drama commission.
So could you talk a little bit about your transition from documentary into drama then, and what you've kind of...
It's ongoing. I've found it's... God, what have I... I love it. I really, it's funny that I've gone so far the other way, like to now everything being completely scripted and controlled. And
are you going to be casting actors as opposed to, so you're not going to street cast and, but how, as your experience of working, getting performances out of real people and being able to kind of manipulate real situations to tell a story, how would that inform you, do you think, with the drama?
I think on set it means, because like when I shot even the Windsors, I think it means I shoot quite fast, which is, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I don't, and that's good because, scripted TV just certainly has got a pressure. You've got to get through whatever number of pages a day. And I don't mean I shoot fast for the sake of it, but I think I have quite a kind of, once we're lit, I have quite a strong sense of like when the performance is like we've got it and it's not going to be better and we don't need to do 7 takes, that we can move forward. So to keep that energy, I like keeping the energy live and for the actors, so they're not sitting around all the time, because they sit around enough, I'd rather be on set and be able ready to roll and have them be able to play with it a bit more than lose lots of time with so I've learnt a lot about because you block entire scenes out before you shoot them. Obviously you rehearse them. I think the blocking out thing that's when you need a really good collaborative cinematographer.
Are you using single camera?
Because where you're going to end up, like you might shoot like this, but where's the, all of that, having someone that can really help you work the maths out of that, so that the way that you design the scene, you actually design the scene, you don't get stuck, you don't get to end up in some corner, making sure that that's all working beautifully and adding all the added value that should be being added to their performances. And
do you prefer to work with a single camera, or do you?
I don't mind. I think sometimes it's really helpful for speed. But I like single camera. I'm sort of comfortable with single camera. It's kind of where I started. But some things require it, like just there's time-wise and big, huge scenes with lots of people require it. Like that's something like Succession. I think they have like 4 cameras all the time. And it wouldn't be for those, I'm sure they don't have them for the scenes where it's like 2 or 3 people, but those big dinners and things where there's like 14 of them, and you kind of get that sense. Imagine how long it would, I don't know if you've seen it, but to shoot some of those scenes with just, if you had single cameras. I think there's a real benefit to having more cameras when you need them to cover all the material and have that kind of incredible potent performance and not having to wait around to I like the discipline though of scripted. It's a bit like it's quite military in a way, like it's got a form that works, same as commercials. How it's got a system and the system works, and within the system you can be really free, but there's a sort of safety net of the system. I talk a lot with my crew about the importance of hierarchy. I said, I say to them, my only job on set is to look after the director, and your only job on set is to look after me. And then your assistant's and my only job
on
is
set,
to look after the actors, and probably the image with you, but
so I said, if I can make the director happy, then we're all going to get re-employed. If I can't do that, then we're not going to be able to do that. And I just expressed the importance of when we're having a conversation, if I'm talking with the director, that they're listening to everything we say, because that's clues to where we're going next. And they should anticipate where we're going next. They shouldn't be reacting to things. The reaction's too slow. It needs to be anticipation based on instincts.
It's so true. And it's so hard actually as director to hold all that, because you've got to be in the scene you're shooting, immersed completely, but there's something coming up. It's that constant thing of like the pressure of like what's next. I've got to lose that a bit. I think I worry a bit more than I should about, are we running over and all that, just because I don't want to, again, it's that like I don't want to fail by the end of the day and have dropped a scene, or I think I've got to let go of that a bit.
How important is your relationship with a producer? Do you have producers that you're going to do you think you're going to work on a series of works together, or do you choose them based on each project?
I think it's a really important relationship, particularly in drama, because the producer's got a huge amount of power, and they look after the whole project, from the very early days and early stages. And if you have a good relationship with your producer, that's just an ally. It's such an important ally to have. If your actors are unhappy for some reason, even if it's extraneous things not to do with this, it's so important. If you had a fractious relationship with your producer, I think it would be really hard. I would find it really hard. I think you need the support you know. And they're good on story. They're also on top of the story. They're on top of the script. So, you know, the writers are usually on set for drama and comedy. So they're there all the time. So that, you know, then sometimes you might not agree with a note you're getting from the writer, but you'll still, you know, the producer's there to help iron stuff like that out.
It's
like a bit like commercials actually.
Yeah.
They iron all those different relationships out.
Yeah.
And they're really
so
important.
Do the notes from the writer usually go through the producer to you, or do you ever have direct? It
depends. I think that the etiquette on the Windsors, because the writers got to know me quite well, they didn't mind just coming and telling me. But that's as we went on and they got comfortable, and because I didn't mind, but I think some directors would mind, and so it would go through the producer. In the beginning it went through the producer, and then it was easier to just come to me.
And those notes, what's your sort of strategy for including the director's, the writer's notes?
Notes are tricky, aren't they? Yeah. I think when the notes are good, they're good, and like that's great. It's only when you don't agree with the note.
Yeah.
So what do you do? I suppose if I had a really good producer, I'd talk to the producer about it. Maybe it's better to just shoot.
Yeah.
But if you're going to shoot a version that you really, really, really don't want to use, that you really think isn't, you've got to be careful and not give up. Yeah. And maybe it's a point to stop and discuss and like. Yeah. But if it's a good note, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a tip I give to people as well.
But if you don't want it in there and you really hate the idea of that, and you think it changes the nature of the storytelling, then you've got to fight for it.
Yeah, because sometimes I'm told to shoot something, doesn't matter, we won't use it, and I'm like,
are you sure?
Are you sure? Yeah. Who's gonna guarantee that? Because otherwise we won't shoot it then. Yeah. You know, if you're definitely not going to use it, then let's not shoot it, because there's always a chance that you're going to use it. Yeah. And you got, you know, sometimes you don't like something because you think it's not going to get used, and that's it goes, and it's heartbreaking. So you have to be careful. You're right. You have to be careful of that.
Yeah. And contradictory notes. I mean, I had that a few. That is absolute. You've got to put your foot down. Then you've got. It's too confusing for the actor. It's too. You know, it's like you just can't do. If you've got 2 or 3 writers and they've all got different, you just can't do it. They've got to work out what they're doing first, and that's a good producer. That's a producer that should be managing that and come with one clear note, because it must be really infuriating for actors to get lots of notes that feel contradictory.
Do you think you do your best work with repeated on jobs where you've worked with someone before? For example, cinematographers. Would you say that you build a relationship and you improve over, I say, a series of works together?
Completely. I can see why there's those people that just worked with the same cinematographers and the same producers, and if you have a good working relationship, your work is only going to get honed and get better and better. I mean, maybe it comes a point where you're getting lazy or something, but I can't imagine that. I think that I absolutely love going back to people I have a really good shorthand with and who I know what they'll bring, and like it frees you up to do really amazing work.
I agree. I totally agree. I think there's 2 kinds in commercials. There's 2 kinds of directors. There's ones that like to build up a family, and they want to collaborate with you on a series of jobs together. And the first job is a kind of feeling out process, and then there's a little bit of trust built. And by your 3rd job, you're completely instinctive with each other, which that's when I think you do your best work. And then there's the other kind of directors that like believe that different DOPs are suited for different jobs. So they'll have someone that, you know, they'll bring a different DOP in for each job. They'll basically cast a DOP like they'll cast the actors, and it's a kind of, you know, it's like that DOP is suited for this. But I always think that, you know, when I look at my favourite filmmakers, they work with the same crew pretty much. And not just the cinematographers, they'll literally work with the same, they'll try and hold the same crew to create an atmosphere that they can maintain. And I think that's something that I think it's really valuable, having a sense of community, and knowing that people will go further for you when things get tough. You're not going to be out there on your own. You're going to have a whole family around you that will look after you. I think
it definitely makes sense to me, and I also think it's like, you know, they kind of understand your nuances too. You know, it takes time to get to know someone, and so I think to really then start to have a deeper understanding of someone's artistic vision, I think that's really exciting, and that means you're going to do surely you're going to do better work. I hate the idea, like you just said, about like, so that's probably my main creative frustration with the industry, is exactly what you just described. Like, that DOP can do cars and that one can do that, because it's the same for directors. And you know, that you do comedy or you do drama and you do documentary, you know, I just hate that. I find that's, you know, that's something I've really struggled with and I'm really fighting, and I've always tried to resist. But everyone, they feel safe putting you in boxes. And actually, if you can direct comedy, why can't you direct drama? And if you can direct, it's just all storytelling. I find that really unbelievably short-sighted and frustrating. Anyway, that's my only gripe. It's almost like they kind of, you inadvertently, certainly in commercials I find, you inadvertently become a kind of brand. As a director or a DOP, you kind of become a brand, and you kind of, I'm starting to become aware of the kind of brand that I want to become now, and have some kind of tailoring around that. But before it was just like it was a brand in other people's eyes, but not necessarily in mine. Because people want to be able, like you say, kind of typecast you, but it is understanding what your brand is. What's the Amanda Blue brand? Kind of I find that so frustrating because I don't know, and I think I'm not good at that stuff. Other people tell me. So I was recently meeting with lots of production companies because at the moment I don't have a UK production company and I haven't signed. And I remember the first few meetings I had, which is no one's fault because it's the way it works. And of course, production companies have got to decide what you are and what your brand is and who'll come to you for what. I get it. That's the business. But it was sort of weird that so all along with commercials, I'll talk specifically about commercials. I was the person who could do emotion. That would be what I'd say. She can do emotion. She can make you cry, and she can get really beautiful. And a storyteller, definitely storytelling's at the heart, and amazing performances. But you can do. So it was emotion. So it wasn't that I do funny, And the irony being is lots of my documentaries were actually comedy documentaries. I did lots of that, and then I recently. So now I've gone off and made 2 comedy series in long form. And when I came back to starting to have these meetings with commercial production companies who want to sign me, they're like, "Oh, you do comedy?" And of course their eyes light up because it's a woman doing comedy. They keep telling me there's only 3 or 2 female comedy directors in commercials. I don't know if that's true, but there's very few because women aren't funny, you know that. So because women aren't funny, they don't do comedy. So so that was the thing, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm now going to be a comedy director." I was the woman who could do emotion, and now I'm a comedy. So
you can make them laugh, you can make them cry.
Next? Can't I be both? Could I be both? Is that even possible? Is that too confusing? No, too confusing. I was like, okay, you decide then, because it's madness.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to hand it over to them and say, "How do you want to sell me?"
I did. It's like, okay, if that helps, whatever gets the jobs in. But anyway, I think it's sort of mad. When I said about women aren't funny, I actually said that to women. This is sort of an aside. So I met this guy at Soho House. I'm not naming names. Production company producer, male producer, who runs this, because he was saying, "Oh, you do comedy," and I said, "Yeah, because I know it's of course women don't, because women aren't funny," and he went, "Oh, I don't know if I'd say that." And I was like, "Oh, God, you're fucking no way I'm signing with you, you humorless prick." He didn't get that was a joke. I'm
it's a perfect joke.
It's a bit harsh. You don't know that joke? Okay, you're off the list.
That's a good way of gauging someone, isn't it? Tell them a joke, they don't laugh. Yeah. That's another thing, actually, I wanted to ask you, so thanks for reminding me. But how much does humour play a part in your collaborators, the people you work with, and also your storytelling?
Humour is everything. It's really everything. I think I've realised that. If you don't, with the collaborators, if you can't have a laugh together, I mean, I actually think it's really, and it's such a telltale sign of someone's intellect or their take on things, or their riff on the world, or whatever. I mean, I think it's crucial. It's so crucial. God, if they, you might go, "Look, I don't know if they have much fun, or they're much." It's got to be fun. I think the most important thing is that it's really fun and you have a really good time. And I know that people always have a really good time. I always make sure we have a good time. That's crucial.
And do you think that feeds into the quality of the filmmaking?
Yeah, I think it feeds into the atmosphere on set. I think it means that people are enjoying what they're doing, and I think that people want to come and do good work. And it's not that it should just be a laugh a minute and we're not, you're getting on with it, you're still, but I think you've got to be able to, and there's, it gets really tense as well. So you've got to be able to burst you've got to change the mood of the room sometimes. And just a funny quip will be the thing that just sorts it all out. And you can keep going, and you're all in this together, and it's a shit show, and you've got to be able to laugh about it, or it's not a shit show, but
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few good anecdotes we could share with people working together. One of my favourite ones is when we did that Dove commercial, the Dove bar, and the whole thing was designed around a granddad, the four generations,
and the old man who was 93 and died like 3 months later. Bless him. Yeah.
And I remember when we set the interview up, and it was important that he would talk about the bar of soap that he used. Do you remember? And he didn't mention it once, and we travelled like all the way to Pittsburgh, and we've gone through this whole process.
And he mentioned, no, he actually was worse than that. He didn't mention it. He then mentioned Clinique.
And it was so funny because I remember it was so, and that's when I got a real sense of your kind of integrity as well, because I remember you just turned to me and went, well, if he doesn't use it, he doesn't use it. I'm not going to force him to say he uses it.
You said, oh my God, people would be freaking out now and making him say it. I'm like, I'm not making a 93-year-old man say something.
Oh, that was brilliant. I really loved that. That's one of my favourite
I remember having faith that he'd said this one good thing. Bless him. He was really elderly, wasn't he? And he said this because there was the 4 women. There was his daughter, who was the grandmother. He was the great-grandfather, grandmother. Then there was the mothers, who were all like in their 30s. And then there were the teenage girls. And he'd already set up, this is when you have the confidence. This is what I mean about knowing your story. Like, he said this great line. And it's like, as soon as I've got the great line for documentary, because you asked me about perform. As soon as I know they've said the amazing thing, I literally go tick, done. It's in the edit. It's like literally in the bank. It doesn't matter now what he. So yes, he didn't say that, and then he said the hilarious thing about he loved Clinique, but he had said my 4 girls. There were the girls, and they brought the boys, and they're all beautiful, and they all have beautiful skin, and they get it off their grandfather. Ha ha ha! And he made this really good old man joke, like that he got all their beautiful looks and skin came from him. So I was like, that's better than him mentioning the stupid brand. I mean, sorry. So that was funny. Yes, there's been many times. My funny things, but I can't remember how it went, was when. This is probably when Benji the first, we were stuck in that room and Video Village was miles away, and we're trying to shoot a pterodactyl or something on the floor talking, and the woman had to step on it. It was one shot, and they didn't like the pterodactyl, and then they wanted different dinosaurs.
And Benji's comments.
Benji was so hilarious.
So straight with it.
He was so straight with it, and we were just crying because he just kept throwing up. He had a very good knowledge of all the different dinosaurs' names, which I'd forgotten, but he was just kept throwing more in.
I remember that so well. It was genius. It was comic perfection, I thought.
It was genius.
And the fact is that I don't think they understood that he was.
No idea.
Joking with them. No. That's what made it even funnier.
I know, because they were being really serious and adding more. Yes. Try the Philopodopoulos, whatever it was. I can't remember.
And he just did it so straight down the radio, just completely straight, and we were all crying with laughter. Yeah.
That's a no on the pterodactyl. All she had to do was tread on it. It was so funny. Anyway, that's the madness of commercials. That's
it's a good point. Yeah.
Whew, does it really matter that much?
Yeah, they get hooked. They get stuck on one thing, don't they?
Details.
Yeah. They get stuck on a detail. And then,
that's true, and that's a very good lesson to learn about commercial. I think I did it. So some of those things take you a while to learn. It's like, let them have that detail then, because if they care about that thing so much, if you take that away from them, like it's like knowing your battles. Knowing your battles, yeah. And I think that's really key. And like it happens to me on all sorts of things. Like even the budget for this film I'm doing at the moment, this feature documentary, is like, we wanted certain things, but it meant, like there was a drone shot we wanted, but you just had to balance. It was all like, well, if we forget that, because if we don't know that, we can have Steadicam for 3 days, or it's like just going, okay, which one is more important? Even in the budgeting, even when you're sort of working out what you really want, and the same on set. If an actor really wants to do it again, but you're happy, but they really do, and it would really help them, just let them do it again. I mean, it doesn't undermine your authority, you know.
Yeah, I totally.
Or maybe it does, but if it doesn't, then just let people have their thing.
Yeah, that's a real emotional intelligence, isn't it? And it takes time to learn that, to kind of to know what the important thing is, the stuff you need to hold on to,
fight for, and hold on to, and be really kind of strident about, and then the things you were allowed, you can let slide.
And that works exactly the same as a cinematographer as well, because you look at an image, and there's certain aspects of that image that are really important, putting a fight up for, and the other things you can let go. So you don't want to be the person that's always kind of being rigid with your approach, particularly when you're working collaborating with directors. Actually, one of the best things I ever learned about communicating with a director is never say no to a director. Always give them options, but make it clear that one option is better than the other option, but give them two options and let them decide.
Sell the option you like best.
Yeah.
The hardest.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't know. Come up with a clever way of getting what you want.
But that's, when I first started out, I'd say no because I couldn't see how the other option would work. Yeah. But now you've got to present both and then you don't even, if you have trust with someone, they can just, they'll ask you, they'll say, well, what do you think? If you kind of, sometimes you just have to go, like that, and that's enough for them to know there's a doubt in your mind whether that's going to work or not.
The edit's really key for that. Like, I remember an editor I used to work with a lot saying, I don't get stuckest. And you'd get, like, we would have cut some beautiful sequence and we think it's essential and it's got to go in that particular place in the structure, and both of us would get stuck on it and just be sure. And actually sometimes with editing is particularly just try, like you do just have to, I don't know, let's see. You've got to do a bit of let's see because you just don't know. You just don't know. Yeah. Like exactly the same thing. You've got to be certain and then you've got to also be prepared to play around. Do
you like the kind of the phrase, a film gets made 3 times, once in writing, once in the production, and once in the editing. Would you say that it's kind of a little bit like a relay race where you have your sort of producer that you're working with for the first the pre-production stage, and then that gets handed over to the cinematographer when you're actually shooting, and then that gets handed over to the editor. Do you find that kind of refreshing that you have a new set of eyes to kind of reinterpret the film for you to go through?
I do. I love editing. Like, I'm a real fan of editors and editing, so I really like that process of them seeing it, and they won't have been part of it. Mostly they won't have been part of any of the preceding months of pre-production and even the shooting or anything, so they really are the freshest eyes. They're the freshest eyes. So I think what good editors bring is it's just as important as cinematographers. It's like they're my other key creative collaborator in every sense. And
do you have that situation where you build trust with them and you like to try and get the same people back on?
I like to let editors be for a while, and it's not quite the same with cinematographers. I suppose it is in pre-production, like we can just be discussing and you can be throwing up ideas, but I think editors have to sit with the material and not have me waging in too early, and then you start to see their choices, like because so on a scripted show they roughly assemble everything you've shot by the end of that week. So and you're not meant to really, but you kind of go, oh no, there was a better take than that, but like sometimes it gives a sense of, or they've just nailed it, you're like, oh, you totally got the, and usually we'll have said like we liked that take, and that it'll be noted down by the script supervisor.
So you leave them be for a bit to just get familiar with the first
because you don't get, I mean it's probably not the same on everything, but usually you don't get in the room with them till you wrap. So they will have roughly assembled everything you've shot, but really, and then you'll get in the room and then you'll fine cut the whole thing, and you'll go back to, you'll completely start. You don't always completely start again, but you certainly, the rough assembly's there because it's been scripted, so it's all there, and he or she knows what shots, what coverage you've shot. So
is that your favourite part of the process, the editing?
I think the editing is. It's really bad to say that. I think the safety of the edit. I think the fact that you're not on set and you're not on location and there's lots of cafe lattes happening and sushi's around the corner. It's like I'm in a warm room and I've done all that hard work and all this amazing material that you sweated over and you were out, at 3 a.m. freezing over, and is there, and it's just there to be enjoyed, and like
it's unwrapping the presents.
It's unwrapping the presents. It's so that for me, I think that's what I love. But I love shooting. But shooting is always slightly terrifying. Like, it's just, it has a not terrifying that immobilizes you or anything, but it has it's like running a race. It has that energy.
Yeah.
And you can do it for 8 weeks or whatever, or you can do it for 3 days on a commercial or 1 day on a commercial, but you want it to end. You want to get off.
I think it's like a little bit like going into battle, and that's why I think that the hierarchy is so strict. Because it is like a military hierarchy. It's a military maneuver in a sense, isn't it? Because
you've got so much backup. That's why I love documentaries. So scary because you've got no one. When you've got like a incredible department, art department, and people that can just fix things and come up with ideas and help you, and they're all there to help this vision. It's so exciting and it's so sort of special, and you can't believe that all this effort goes into this wonderful thing to create this hopefully really lovely piece of art, piece of storytelling. And I think that the hierarchy is really important because you feel safe in it.
Yeah.
People know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they know what their job is, and they can get better at it. And, art department's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think they're super close to the action as well. Less so the production designers. So on drama, like it's like the on-set guys and girls, like they're really running around with you, I think they're under a huge amount of pressure. I mean, everyone is, but...
Yeah, I mean, I don't really get to collaborate with them as much on commercials as you would if you're doing longer form. They're such
to know them really well.
A good production designer will make a cinematographer look great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you get a really good production designer, particularly if you're doing period piece, that becomes hugely important.
Definitely.
The quality of a production designer. On commercials, we rarely meet until we're on set. And the one thing I have liked about lockdown is they force us to have Zoom calls now with all the heads of department, which is brilliant. We should have been doing this from day one, because I get to speak to the production designer before decisions are made. Yeah, and we can talk about colours, and we can talk about the kind of idea we have for practicals or whatever. It's such a valuable to get heads of department together in with the director and have that kind of open conversation, that round table sort of
amazing
thing. It really makes a difference,
and it really would help the director, because so much of the ideas that you bring, like a production designer or a cinematographer bring, really helps you formulate like how you want to shoot a scene or how you want to approach it, or that's the thing. I think we're always the probably the difficulty of the whole business is it's expensive, and we're always suffering for not enough time. Time is always the enemy.
But that's why prep is so important. Like a well prepped film is an efficient film, and you're going to get the best out of it. And that's why I do think that the meeting with the heads of department early on. I love to go on direct. As you know, I like to come on directors' recce's when I can, because I think once you decide on the location, I think that's a huge impact for me. For the role of a cinematographer, I mean, that makes a massive difference. So if you can have any influence in that at all, even if it's just getting pictures sent to you and having a conversation with the director, that's important.
I would never do it without it. I didn't know that, because my first commercials, all of them you shot, I thought that was the norm. And I remember going to shoot a commercial in Australia actually, and this like cinematographer who was all young and up and coming, and everyone was excited about him, and I said, oh well, he'll come on the recce, and she was like, oh, do you want him to? And I was like, yeah, like I'm not going to make the decision by myself. Like I know what I want, but I also want to make sure it works for it was a man, for him, and he was thrilled. She said he's never been asked on a and I was like, I didn't know how else she'd do it. Like I don't want to, like there's that thing where you get sent all the pictures and I narrow it down. I sort of narrow it down a bit without anyone, because you can just sort of, but I think it's really important that
to walk the space together. I mean, I talk a lot about how important that is for the process of framing the shots. I like to do all of that on the recce. I
love that, and then it helps you storyboard. Then I can go back and storyboard properly. But without you there, I'm a bit like, well, I don't know if you might not want to shoot in that direction. There's a window there, and like things that I think look nice might be a pain in the ass for everyone for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it's the time that we get together without everyone else around. It's like where we can start thinking of the idea as collaboration. Yeah. Without all the other pressures which on set, there's 1,000 questions. How many questions you get asked in the first 10 minutes of being on a film set? It's just an attack.
It comes at you,
yeah.
Comes at you all the time. Mainly like, what sort of tea would you like? Would you like your tea? No. What chair would you like to see? Is that no, not really.
The look on your face when you first got someone went and asked you those questions
and brought it for me. I'm like, I am never leaving the commercial set ever again. Fuck documentaries. Who wants to be on the M4 getting fucking Burger King at like 3 a.m. in the camera van? I'm done.
So let's on that subject, let's talk a little bit about where you came from then, because my question to you earlier was, when did you first get a sense that you wanted to direct?
I think I had I had a very early experience, which is not like, people go, oh, I just wanted to take photos once before, and I had a cine camera. Like that didn't happen. I realized I thought when I was about 15, I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't know that was a job. And then I found out you could write stories, and you could and I was always really interested in current affairs. I came from quite a left-wing political family, so
you didn't rebel against that?
No. I was in my anti-Nazi league badges, my jumpers and my Doc Martens. No, I definitely didn't rebel against that. And I thought, and then I arranged for my own work experience when I was like 15 to go to like newspapers and like Channel 9 News, and went out in a helicopter and did a story, and like so I became interested in storytelling in that sense. And I went to university and I did study, I did an arts degree, and I did do some journalism, but I did also theatre, and I did, you know, classic theatre, and I did modern theatre, and I fell in love with it.
How's the theatre informed you now, would you say?
I mean, it was such a brief thing if I think about it, because I didn't pursue it, but I was really good at it, and I got really amazing marks. It was like my best marks. And we used to direct little plays, and, you know, but I was learning, like, you know, about Brecht and Stanislavski, and doing, you know, all the Greek plays, and it was brilliant. So it was a real general learning curve of the kind of the literature around, you know, plays, but the study of plays. But it was also working, there were a lot of people on that course who were actors, so I was a kind of art student doing journalism and communications and cultural studies and things, but I was doing these big theatre units, and I directed a small play, and then I was in a small play as well, and I just loved the whole thing of bringing something to life, like taking this text, this incredible text, like Endgame or something, you know, Samuel Beckett or something, and turning it into something that was real and live and visceral. And so my sort of, do I want to be a journalist? I was like, no, I don't really want the page. I think I care more about, and I was a real film goer, definitely, all through teenage years. My brother was pretty obsessed with music and cinema, and so was I. So we were culture vultures. And
did your parents have a sense of cinema? Did they enjoy cinema?
No, but they weren't like, but they were more political. They definitely loved films, and they definitely loved books and things, but they weren't literary, or they weren't.
So it's your
they
brother
were more working class than that, but they were definitely interested in the world and the world around them, and they were liberal. So I didn't grow up in a household of conservative people. They were liberal people, and not racist and not homophobic, which is quite unusual for our generation. I didn't have any of that, thank God. So that was like the beginning. I thought, I want to be a storyteller, but do I want to? Is it theatre? Is it? I really love films as well, and I just was, I suppose, around my late teens, you know, before I finished university, is when I thought, and I started watching more and more sort of like left of field cinema, French New Wave, 70s, American, Australia, you know, and then I really fell in love with cinema, and by the time I left university and I came here to do the classic Australian 1 year, because also my parents are Scottish, they're Glaswegian, and they emigrated to Australia, so I had big British links. All my family were in the UK, my grandparents, my cousins, so I came over to do the classic year of backpacking and fell in love with London, and then by that stage was really sure I wanted to be like a scriptwriter or a director, or I wanted to tell stories that were for the cinema, not for the theatre. And so when I finished travelling, I decided to stay here and do a master's, and I did a master's in film. And that's when I was like 23 or something. So that's when I really honed that was the kind of storytelling I cared about the most. And that's what, you know, moved me and struck me and was part of my everyday parlance, you know, the way I saw the world, I suppose. Like, not the way, the art form I went to the most was cinema.
Did you believe back then when you were studying as a student, did you actually believe that you were going to have a career in that, and that was going to be your sole kind of earning?
I was pretty determined. I didn't, you know, I was pretty bloody
back
determined.
Then it wasn't a given at all that you could actually do it.
No, it wasn't. I was pretty determined, though. I was pretty certain and headstrong, and was going to do whatever I bloody well could, for sure. And I think that 15-year-old confidence to write to the kind of Channel 9 News, thinking I want to do work experience, and I went to all of those stations and did it. No one else, everyone else just worked at their dad's, you know, taxation office, or the mum's got a florist, or, you know, I went and did something. Like, I think I knew.
Where do you think you got that kind of strength?
That grit is from probably having kind of lefty parents. They're quite tough. They're quite sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I didn't have family to cushion the blow. I didn't have grandparents, so I had my family somewhere else. And also, I think, you know, this is getting deep, but I think, you know, my parents separated when I was 11. We lost that. My father went bankrupt. We lost everything. So to be quite young and have quite a profound trauma, like not just your parents split up, but you lose your family home, you lose everything. You're now quite my mum has to get a job as a secretary. She's raising us. Thank God the government give you some benefits because, we weren't living in a council estate, but we were struggling. I think there's something about that experience to go, do you know what? I'm going to have to stand on my own 2 feet. Yeah. My mum wasn't a feminist in the sense of a kind of, card waving, protesting, but she certainly said, don't ever rely on a man. The world's your oyster. Your education's your ticket. I had that message. So I think all of that combined made me know I had to look after myself. And if you wanted something, there was no nepotism, there was no connection to the film business or to anyone that was going to help me. It was going to just be my pure determination and my brains. I think that really helps you as a filmmaker. I remember Roberto Benigni when he accepted an award for Life is Beautiful. I love that film.
And he said, thank you to my parents for giving me the gift of poverty.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
I think you have to be like a tenacious dog at a trouser leg as a filmmaker, don't you? Particularly if you're directing.
Yeah, you have to be self-reliant. No one was going to be able to lend me any money. I was going to have to do it all for myself and make it work. It is a good thing. I know, it is a good thing. It's hard, it's tough, but it's good. And I suppose you maybe always have that thing of knowing it can all go.
Yeah.
So it's better keep working.
Yeah, it keeps you on that edge. Yeah. But that's true of every profession and every life, really, isn't it? And to have a sort of real palpable sense of that, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, there's no there's no inheritance, there's no trust fund to rely on. And I'm glad of that. I'm definitely glad of that. And because it wasn't, I had a strong mum who taught me about hard work, and she was hardworking. She was really hardworking and had to be, and that's a really important thing to just think is normal. That was just normal to me. People got up every day and had to go somewhere to put food on the table, and it's so important. I've made some back, just sort of off point, but I made these documentaries that were really award winning about John Prescott just before he became a Lord and when the Labour Party was transitioning into being Gordon Brown, and it was his journey through the class system, and it was quite funny, but it was also really moving. And I was just going to say about so this was quite a long time ago now. It was before we were really using the word underclass. It was probably the mid 2000s, 15 years ago or something. And I remember going, we were going to go up to working class Rochdale or whatever. And it was when we got there, this phrase working, it was they're not working. No one's working class. No one's working. And no one has been working. Some of the families I met, we're into the children are third generation of not working. So you've got a grandparent who's probably only in their 40s who doesn't work. You've got the parents who are in their 20s who don't work, and you've got children watching. And I remember this amazing community leader, a woman at a community centre there, and the community centre was filled with these incredible women mainly, saying these kids don't even learn. They haven't even watched someone get ready for work. I thought it was it's funny how things stay with you, such a thing that she said, so they've never watched someone have to set their alarm at 7. The alarm goes off. You've got to, whatever, iron your clothes, get ready, have breakfast, and leave the house at 8 because you get the bus to work. And therefore the school runs the same. The kids have got to get ready, they've got to have breakfast, they've got to, because a lot of these kids weren't even going to schools. Yeah. They couldn't even, they were getting taxis, and because no one had a system. Yeah,
we are basically a combination of our habits, I think.
And that system just to get up every day and do that thing, it's just, it sounds really fundamental to think that was not even happening in many, many households, just that fundamental lesson of how to get yourself ready for the day.
And that's important as a freelancer as well, to have a routine around your freelance career. So because if you don't have that, then you need some structure to that. Do you find that helps you with writing as well, the kind of work ethic and
and sometimes I lose it and I don't have it, and when I don't have it, it's bad. And because I've got children, I don't have free reign at all, like some people do, and I don't have as much time. So, but when I get into a good system, when the kids are at school and they're not at home because of lockdown or holidays, and I can get into a system, it's great, and it works. It definitely works if you can kind of walk the dog, do your meditation, come back, even if you only do 3 or 4 hours, or even if you don't only do an hour, but just I find that the system can pretty quickly unravel, and then I don't get.
It's having that non-distracted deep time, isn't it, to do deep work?
That's what I'm suffering from not having mostly, isn't that that very intensive time.
When's the best? When during the day, is there a particular period that you can write?
I'm really good in the morning, so I can get up really early. I can get up at like 5, and that's my best time. And I'm really good until probably. I'm not good I would never try and write in the evenings. And people write in the evenings, and that's but. I'm the opposite. I'd probably be done. I mean, because I had the kids coming home at 3:30 from school. Not now because they're older and they get home later at like 5. But for a long time, my deadline was kind of 3:00. And I wouldn't have been able to write all day because there's other stuff. You know, someone's got to buy groceries and do other shit. So, but I think the morning's really good for me. And if I've got loads done by 3, I'd probably stop then.
Yeah, that's what I do. I give myself. If I can get everything done by like 6:00 and give myself an evening of watching movies and just relaxing, and
mine is probably more like 3 or 4 o'clock, and then sometimes you got a lot of calls or things. I don't mind that's at 4 or in that afternoon bit, those last couple of hours. I don't mind doing calls. I don't mind doing Zooms. I don't mind, but actually sitting and writing and that intense creativity, I definitely can't do it much past that time. Maybe 5 at the most. I really go to, and I because I can get up really early, and I generally get up quite early. I don't go to bed super late.
On the subject of deep kind of creativity, how important a role would you say is how important a stage is the casting process for you in terms of, we haven't really spoken much about casting.
Really important. I mean, crucial. If you get that right, you're fine. You're kind of basically fine unless you fuck it up.
And do you have a process of casting? Is there a kind of any sort of
casting.
tips
I really
you
like
would give
casting.
young directors on what they should look out for?
I think trust your instinct. I think your instinct's everything. And if you've got good instinct, you know.
Do you have to have people? Do you cast people that you know are going to not need direction, or do you want to hear them almost say it correctly in the casting, or do you? I
don't expect someone. I mean, it's amazing if someone comes in and nails it, does the first few lines, and they've got the tone that you have in your head, or they bring something to it that's even better than you could have imagined. That's amazing. But if you like them and it's interesting what they're doing, but actually you give them notes, like you might play it more, whatever it may be, play it slower and more thoughtfully or whatever. I think it's really important to see that people can take notes. Now, that's not necessarily the case for someone who's like incredibly crafted, done it forever, won 3 Oscars, maybe. But I think if you're going to be working with that, you've got to have a working relationship, and how well they take notes and listen to what you've said and take that on board is a massive indicator of how you're going to be able to work with them. Because if they can't take notes and can't change their performance, like the nuance of their performance, then they're not going to be a good enough actor.
And when you feel you found a right cast, how much of a battle you put up with production, other influencers coming in and trying to change the cast? Yeah,
they're those ones. I think the ones you really want and think are absolutely spot on, you've got to fight for. You've got to really fight for.
Yeah,
really fight for, definitely.
I remember listening to a documentary on Quentin Tarantino and how he cast for Pulp Fiction, and
they didn't want Thingy, did they? Because he was a has-been.
Yeah, didn't want John Travolta.
They thought he was a has-been.
Yeah, and he was willing to walk away from the deal if he didn't get John Travolta. And there's this famous conversation between him and Harvey Weinstein. And Harvey Weinstein started counting down. No, I think Tarantino started counting down from 10, and he was going to walk away. And Harvey Weinstein, being Harvey Weinstein, refused to say yes to John Travolta. And in the end, his assistant jumped in and said yes on his behalf. On
Harvey's behalf, because he couldn't allow himself to... that megalomaniac couldn't be wrong.
Yeah. And then when he saw it, of course, he said, I'm so pleased that I cast John Travolta. Harvey Weinstein.
I'm sure he took complete credit for that. That's clever. That's having some balls. That's also having made a brilliant film that you've got some cachet and power.
But one of the things I loved about the documentary the most, and I'd recommend it, if people haven't seen it, I'd really recommend it, is when he made Pulp Fiction, it's the first film that made him money, because Reservoir Dogs is a very low budget film, so Pulp Fiction made him some real money. And he said, they asked him, the crew, I think the editor asked him, she said to him, what are you working on, what are you going to work on now? What are you going to, what's your next job? He goes, well, I'm going to start writing my next film, and in a couple of years' time, we'll shoot that. And she was like, well, aren't you going to be shooting anything in between that? And he goes, why would you need to do that? Look how much money we just earned. how do you live? Because he basically lived with, you know, like
he lived within what he earned. That he can live off that for 2 years.
Yeah. So all he wanted to do was make his films, and he didn't care about all of the trappings of celebrity. He just wanted to make his films. That was his priority. So he made that earning of that one film last for years until he was ready to make his next film. And I really love that. I love the kind of that sort of that confidence in a way, and not getting distracted by things that are of less importance. And that kind of leads me on to my next question. When you worked with Mike Figgis, I remember you saying that you kind of lucked out on the first job you did with him, didn't you? You did Leaving Las Vegas, right?
It's my first ever job ever in the business.
So I mean, like, everything kind of came together in that film. And
the stars aligned. This guy, the line producer, what was his name? Mark. Oh my God, he was such a classic. I loved him. He was like the classic quintessential, like central casting, get me a Jewish guy to line produce a film, like hilarious, New Yorker, been around the block. And I remember him saying to me, "Oh, you're fucked now. This is the this is the first film you've ever worked on. It's only going to be downhill from here." It was like, and it was just, I so remember him saying that to me. Mike was in a really good place, he had been in a really bad place because he'd made a load of films that, you know, because he was very much a Hollywood director, even though he was British, and studios had taken back and recut, and he'd made a really successful film, Internal Affairs, that they loved. Do you know that film with Richard Gere? It's a really good thriller, really isn't it? And he had a huge amount of money in the bank, metaphorically money in the bank, and money, I think, real money, but and then he went off and made his kind of dream, his own personal art, more arty, let's say, films, and he got burnt. They all hated them, and they were all, for various reasons, they were taken back, and studios did awful things, and he had terrible experiences. I hope I'm saying this is right. And then he made a nice film in the UK called The Browning Version, which did quite well, but wasn't, again, like, you know, it was a really lovely film, but didn't, you know, go on to win loads of awards or anything. But so by the time he was pretty fed up, I think, and he found that, you know, got sent this great book by some friends of his, which was Leaving Las Vegas, and he decided to make a low-budget film. So it was around the time, I think, it was just Tarantino's first film. Like, it was really that beginning of the 90s independent cinema. It was just like Jim Jarmusch was making films, Tarantino was about to, or had maybe just made his first film. It was very much that crest, that early. And so to make a film for $4 million at the time for a director who'd been making much bigger films was like a real step down. And but he could control it. That's all he wanted. And it was French financing, so he could control the film, and he had complete say. I mean, he still would have had to. I think there was still various arguments about lots of things, but he had more control than he'd had by being an independent film. And he decided to shoot it on Super 16, which again, I didn't understand why that was so significant until I learnt so much on that film, and I learnt so much about what Super 16 was and why it was the choice aesthetically and what it meant, and then it went on obviously to be hugely successful and make lots of money, and, you know, get nominated for 4 Oscars, and Nicholas won for Best Actor, and it won all these other Golden Globes and Independent Spirit Awards and everything. But I just I think even for him the stars aligned, you know, like everyone wanted to do it, everyone was doing it for the right reasons. Nicolas Cage at that time wanted to do an interesting film because he'd been doing a few Hollywoody things that weren't stretching him. Everyone was doing it because they believed in it. I think that's that, you know, you have those times, don't you, when it just feels like everyone's there for the right reasons and everyone really cares about it, thinks it's an important story, and so it was, and Mike was in a really good place, so it was kind of blessed, I think.
You know, that's I really like that kind of point you make about doing it for the right reasons, because after that, of course, you saw
it changed.
Well, you saw Hollywood, I guess, didn't you?
Yeah, and then it was never as nice. Yeah. Like the films were always fraught, and, you know, I really saw a lot quite young about like the system and how it works, and it so wasn't the same energy. Yeah.
So that's quite a good tip for young directors, because I guess there's this ambition of thinking that the big time is going to reward you with everything, and that's actually not the case for most people.
You lose control. Yeah. It's about how much you want to have control. It's a bit like documentaries. You have a lot of control, and then you go to a commercial where you you do have a bit of control, but you don't have much because there's so many people feeding in.
Yeah.
That's the two opposite ends of the spectrum, and everything else is in a spectrum in other places.
Yeah.
But those two are from the least to the most control, I think.
Yeah, the more money is involved, the more parties that are involved. And that famous saying, a racehorse designed by a committee is a camel, kind of comes into play. That whole kind of, the monitor kind of... committee around the monitor, and everyone's pitching in. Yeah, I mean, it changed a lot when we transitioned from video to film, from film to video, I should say.
I mean, of course, big, huge directors that are have had all their successful films, and of course, they have amazing control on those huge films still. But they're rare. They're more rare than out there. You've got to have. Yeah.
So your priority would always be to have final cut.
I would love to have final cut. I don't mind like input and notes. I'm not precious because I think actually, I think you need that. I think you need outside, you need screenings and you need to know how things are playing and, but I think if you don't get to kind of realise your vision, then it definitely gets compromised. But it's not to say that I'm not open to feedback. I completely am, completely am.
What advice? Let's get into some kind of nice, kind of obvious questions, but nice for the viewers. What's the one thing that you wish you knew when you started your career?
That you don't need to know everything.
Yeah, you don't need to know.
I think I wish I knew that. I wish I knew that was okay. I definitely wish I didn't feel insecure about not knowing it all, and to have thinking trust that was a weakness and a vulnerability, and it makes me look stupid, and I don't deserve to be here. Exactly, like that all feeds into the imposter syndrome. What have you got better at doing now than when you first started, would you say? Probably being more decisive. Like I said, like that commercials discipline of having to look at a treatment, having to look at a script and then do a treatment, so really decide what you're making, because documentary is quite organic, so you're allowed to kind of have lots of kind of ideas for quite a while, and then having to storyboard, so making decisions, which is all a discipline. But that can only come from experience. Experience, and then learning to be very decisive. But I think what I've fine-tuned, and what is still the most fundamental, and this is like, you can't teach this, is trusting your instinct. I think trusting your instinct is everything. Yeah, but when your instinct is refined, that's good. Yeah. But when you're starting out, your instinct isn't necessarily to be trusted. I know. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? That is the problem. Yeah, it's knowing how's the kind of. But what a director should have, if you don't have this, you should have an instinct for the story you're telling. You should. I would even look back and think the first thing I ever made, even though I might not have known all the, how to shoot it, I knew the story I was telling, and what was that story, and what did I want it to feel like that. Right. If you don't have that, you're not really, maybe you're not a storyteller, I don't know, maybe you've got to believe in the story, even if it's written by someone else or it's someone else's idea. Yeah. It comes back to that point of view again, doesn't it? Yeah, you've got to have a point of view on that thing. Otherwise it's like, I don't know, what is it? You're sort of just flailing about. You've got to have an instinct for it and what it is you're trying to say, or what emotion you're trying to elicit, or how you're trying to make it be funny, or whatever the particularities of it are. So let's talk a little bit more about performances. Are there any kind of techniques for getting a performance out of a real person as opposed to an actor? Well, I think fundamental is they've got to feel comfortable, like absolutely. They've got to feel ready to tell their story, and you've got to get them to the place of being ready. So I actually spend quite a lot of time, not always, this isn't true, but if I can, with the main subjects of my documentaries before I film with them. So just talking, it'd be the same with actors. I think time spent talking about the character with an actor, like how do you see the character, like so that we're in a similar space, or at least I understand their perception. But with real people, what I've got to know is what their story is and how they feel about their story, and what are they willing to talk about, what's uncomfortable, and if it's uncomfortable, is it uncomfortable but okay to push them on it, or is it off limits because it's traumatizing? Right, that's a really interesting point. You've got to really it's really dangerous to say this, but it is true, and it's like I've always grappled with this. You are sort of like a psychologist, and you've got to be very careful with people's feelings, because you're taking them on a journey. Sometimes I do interviews that are 4 hours long, taking someone back through something that could be quite dark. So you've got to kind of know how to lead them there. And I often lead people there in quite circuitous ways. I don't directly always come in with the thing. It might be other things that allows them, like, just to get people talking, because people can be quite nervous. So you need their everything, their voice, their choice of words, to feel natural and flowing. So you've got to get them to the space where they've sort of forgotten about everyone else. They're just focusing on you. So you've got to have complete eye contact. Like, I often lean quite far forward. I don't want to be ever that too far away from them. I have to make it so that everything else disappears for them, because they're not actors. They're not used to all this other stuff around them. And so you kind of start to lead them down a path that they're feeling safe and comfortable, and then you can start to ask the difficult questions, or the questions that are going to be, elicit funny stuff or whatever it may be. I've always got a very clear agenda when I do an interview of what I want from someone. Always.
And is that through research, or is that just instinct?
Yeah, because I know the story. I kind of usually, what's happened is there's usually been an AP or a researcher spoken to them before I do. I know the sensitivities, so I know where you can go and how far you can go, and and then, like, sometimes a documentary, it's not just about the interview. It might be like we recently shot this sequence where we wanted the women to dance together, and they don't dance together, but they do dance. They're both like these old, they love music, and they're like, so we didn't pressure them, but we had this really beautiful visual idea for them dancing together, and particularly my cinematographer wouldn't let go of it, and I was not sure we were going to get it, but we just set up this atmosphere in the studio, and it was things like, it's clever, you've got to manipulate. It was the last day of filming, so they'd already done like 2 weeks with us, so they're celebratory. It's like, okay, this is like, and then we'll have a drink afterwards, and then we'll so it's like, time it, don't make them do that on day 2. Like, build up the relationship, build up the trust, show them the amazing lights you're using, get them in to have music playing, like, just what I mean, you are sort of, that's the thing with real people, you are slightly manipulating them, but for the right reason. If you're doing it, you're not doing it to expose someone, but you're doing it to show, because what we wanted to do is show their joy. And they talk a lot about, like, there's a lot of talk about music and coming together through music, and it was just a way of, like, how can we show these older women now still.
Have you ever had a situation where you're actually manipulating someone because they're kind of like a villain or something, and you are trying to expose them, or have you always been completely empathetic to
it depends. I've definitely had not very nice people in some films, so I just would come at them. I would come at someone who's difficult and reluctant and not just with the questions. That's and maybe start default. A bit softer, but just go with the questions. I wouldn't have the same, especially if it's not someone that you might only be filming with them for that hour. You don't have like a relationship that has to sustain over a year or whatever it may be. But
have you ever had to try and provoke someone into giving?
I definitely think I do provoke a bit. I think that's part of it a bit. I think I even do it with subjects that are, if there's something funny or if there's something, it's like, you've got to be a provocateur. I think you are being a provocateur. I think you want to get reactions from people. So I definitely do a bit of that, even in a cheeky way, just in a kind of fun way. I remember, like, this sounds manipulative, but it wasn't like when I made the John Prescott series, like, here's an example of, like, holding your cards and knowing how you're going to get good material from a real person. So, because it was this travel through the class system. And again, it was like the early days of when chav became a term, like it was around that when people wore Burberry and here's this man who'd been the, like, deputy prime minister, and chav was a really known, everyone used that term in a derogatory way. And so when we looked at the class system, we weren't looking at working class, middle class. It was nuanced. It was like underclass. It was like new money, old money, middle England, chavs. Like, what did all these different pejorative terms about class mean, or funny terms? So I was with him in his house, and we were filming something else, and I mentioned the word chavs, and I don't even think we were filming. I just was with him. And because he was quite blustering, and he was quite like, he didn't remember, he's quite like, doesn't really always listen. And I was aware of that. I knew him quite well. He went, what's that? What's a chav? And I went, the light bulb went off, and I went, oh my God, he doesn't know what a chav is. Like, he literally doesn't know that term. He doesn't. And it was a bit cheeky, but I just thought that's because we're going to do a whole section on chavs. And we took him to meet, in inverted commas, chavs. Like, it's a terrible term. But so it's one of the best sequences in the whole thing is the sequence with the chavs, because on the way there in the car, I'm driving with him. He always had this drive, and I'm sitting in the back, and I'm filming him. And I said, so we're going to. He said, "What are we doing? What's this, chavs? We're going to the home of the chavs." It's
Brilliant.
such good. We're going to the home of the chavs, and so this whole sequence is about him not knowing what a chav is,
That's brilliant.
and me hearing my voice going, "You don't know what a chav is? Like, what is it then?" And he's going, "What is it? I don't know." Me explaining to him, Deputy Prime Minister, what it is, and then he meets these girls. So it's like, that's you. I had a piece of information that I knew was going to end up being a good sequence, because I could use that to. And it wasn't to. It sounds like it wasn't to to make him look silly. It was more to watch him experience it, to humanise him, to watch him experience learning something, to see him actually going, oh, that's what that is. So what does that mean? And like that, to watch that process.
No, I like that. That's very good. Yeah. Well, it's been amazing, Amanda, as I knew it would, actually. I was really excited about having you on, because I was saying to these guys, she's going to be brilliant, and you haven't disappointed. So thank you so much, and thank you for being so willing to go, into sort of deeper waters, and to be so kind of honest about everything you've experienced. And it's going to be great for the young filmmakers out there to hear your take on it, and particularly being a successful female director as well. I think that's got a lot of kudos to celebrate. So
thank you, it's a pleasure.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. Tune in next time. We'll have